The celestial voice that you've just heard is that of Frederica von Stade in this new recording of the aria KPFA from the opera Orpheus by Gluck. Welcome to the evening concert. This is Terry Hawkins with another edition of Vocalese. Joining me this evening is Marilyn Hagberg of the Drama and Literature Department, and it is our distinct pleasure to welcome back to the program that wonderful voice that you heard just a moment ago, one of the great singers of our era, Frederica von Stade, who joins us after just having sung last night a stunning recital at the San Francisco Opera House. And it's very gracious of you to come and talk with us so soon after the recital.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
The first program that we did back in the spring received so many phone calls from listeners saying how much they enjoyed not only your singing, but also your comments about the music as well.
Oh, great. Good.
And at one point,
Delighted
I think we
to hear
had
it.
The entire station crew all crowded around the broadcast booth listening to the music.
So you're sort of
great.
back by popular demand.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind. Thank you.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the recital that you sang last night. You chose a lovely program of music that, for the most part, is not that well known. How do you go about selecting works for a recital such as that?
You think a little, you have a lot of considerations. You know, I have to think of a little bit what's been on around within the season, and you give one eye to that. What I pick more and more music that I just adore. You know, I find that's the most fun to do. I was very aware that, you know, the Opera House is not the total ideal for a concert hall because it's so big, and I did feel that separation of being across the orchestra pit from the public that I'm not used to in most recitals. But so that I geared it a little bit with that in mind, thinking of what might not be specifically operatic because there's opera all year long. So I think as much as anything I pick concerts from what I love. You know, and recently I've been loving more and more singing in English. You know, having spent most of my career singing in foreign tongues, foreign to me, it's a great joy to sing in English. And there's so many great composers now, William Bolcom and Conrad Souza and Dominic Argento, and they're writing wonderful songs with wonderful poems for the voice. And so it's a kind of a special joy.
That was a very nice selection of American songs that you sang, songs in English by Virgil Thompson, Charles Ives, Aaron Copland, and Bolcom. And they were really delightful songs, but we talked about this last time, too, during our spring conversation, that English is not the easiest language to sing. It's a little harder to get around some of the consonants and vowels than, say, Italian or even the French, and yet you do it very well.
Well, it's English, but the killer of the voice, of the sung note in English is the diphthong. And that's something that really doesn't exist in Italian. That's why it's quite hard for Americans or English-speaking people to make the totally, faultless transition into a Romance language. It just doesn't exist. The Italian it's the language of song because all the vowels are open and totally pure. And we have so many and we go through Y all the time, and that stops the voice. And it's no fun, frankly, for a public, especially an English-speaking public, to hear songs and not be able to understand them. So you have to overemphasize it, and sometimes it can sound quite harsh. But that's a little bit the challenge of it. There was a marvelous woman called Marilyn Marshall who used to teach it at Juilliard, who just wrote the Bible on singing in English, and it's all principles of Italian song, that she kind of put into a package, and it's very successful, and it's when you study it's quite funny. It's so mother, and it sounds terribly arch, but when you actually sing it in the context of an American accent, which is my accent, it works. you know, but what if you go mother? But it's quite comical when you're studying it.
You gave us quite a range of language in your recital, in fact. Not only the American songs, but also you sang in Italian, French, and German, and Argentinian. The final group were Argentinian songs. So did this take a lot of gear shifting in one evening? It seems to be a lot of languages that you had to keep in mind.
Well, the Spanish is new to me, and I'm going around in my car with those Berlitz language tapes going, you know. Puedo hablar and all day. But the lucky thing is, I had the wonderful support of my new community in studying a little bit of the Argentinian, because Argentine is a slightly different Spanish. And there's a great lady who's a friend who's from the Argentine, a marvelously interesting woman. And so I cornered her one day, and she helped me. And then there's a marvelous man his name is Tony Seelenbacher, and he has a beautiful jewelry shop in Alameda. And he's from Austria. So I kept cornering him. I've been cornering him for Rosenkavalier and going into the shop and saying, Tony, have you got 10 minutes? You see, there's just, you know, Americans always sound American in German. And he's been just terrific. So I've tapped the talents of Alameda.
So you have an unofficial coach?
An unofficial coach. And he's just terrific. He's marvelous, you know.
The Hinastera songs that you sang at the end of the program, those are beautiful
Aren't they
songs.
pretty?
Yes, they are.
And
do you have any plans of recording those?
Marty and I have been asked to do a couple of things, and nothing. We're doing a French record coming up, but I think we will. And I had the nicest telephone call from his widow. She's a wonderful pianist and lives in. And I've met Hinastera. I met him in Switzerland years ago, and she said she'd send some of the songs that he had made different notations. They're impossible to play.
Oh.
Martin Katz is the genius of the accompanying world. He really is the total magic man, and I'm so lucky because he is about one of the most respectful musicians of how things are written and trying to excavate a little bit to find out what's behind them and what do you really mean of a certain rhythm. Bolcom, for example, I'm working on some songs by Bolcom called the Cabaret Songs, and he writes a pachanga for a tempo. Now, do you know what a pachanga is?
Not
it's
offhand, no.
It's a kind of a dance step. But it's such a great description, and Marty is the only man I know who'll go and find out what a pachanga sounds like.
Well, the Hinastera songs are a wonderful combination of a very beautiful lyrical vocal line with these very striking rhythms and harmonies in the piano, but they work together so wonderfully well. I really hope you do record those.
I've fallen in love with the songs, and they're quite famous, folk songs, really. They're kind of, everybody knows, especially the arroro, the little lullaby.
Let's turn now to something that you have recorded, and that is one of the folk song settings by Cantaloupe. You did several of them last night that I don't think you have recorded, the ones that you sang.
No, those are, I'm not sure the ones I did last night have been orchestrated. They're actually called the Chants de France, and they're based on French folk songs. And I'm not sure, I don't think they've been orchestrated, though I'm not sure.
We're going to listen now to an excerpt from the Songs of the Auvergne, probably the most well-known of the sets, the Bailero.
Alias the shepherd song, isn't that?
Yeah, it is. It's two shepherds singing to each other across a large gorge.
You've just heard the Bailero from the Cantaloupe Songs of the Auvergne, performed by Frederica von Stade.
I want to go to something you were talking about, your accompanist. This is a very important aspect in a recital. It's really a collaboration, and a question I have is how often and how closely do you work with your accompanist?
Well, we've done so much. I've worked with Morty 20 years, but if we're doing anything new, we usually get together for a weekend and go through the songs over and over again. I come to him with everything learned. Marty just will go through them, but that's what his job is now. He is the head of the music department in accompanying at University of Michigan, and it's been wonderful for him because he was on the road most of the time with his divas. And now he says it's, you know, he has his children, he has his students who he loves. And one of the things that I have treasured of my collaboration with Marty is his ability to teach and to open up. You know, he's quite demanding. I mean, he says, you know, Flicka, what is your point of view about this? What is being said here? Is it this? And that changes all the time, but he makes you specific, and you take a breath for a reason, or you don't take a breath for a reason. And you, in this particular world of song, which has changed because we've been pushing them into bigger and bigger halls, where there are less communicative abilities because you're so far away and you're in such a monster of a setting, you need more and more to be clear. You know, it becomes, you become more demonstrative. The kind of the face sometimes isn't enough. And Marty has a fantastic sense of humor as well. But underlying it all, in the 25 years I've worked with him, he is no less really passionate about music today than he was. If anything, he's more so. Mm-hmm. And he is like playing tennis with a very good tennis player. You play better. And to sing with him, I mean, he knows everything. He's right there if you're in trouble, or you can tell if you feel like stretching a phrase. He's right there, and he has this great underlying sense of rhythm in his playing and everything he does that just makes it terrific. And he practices nonstop. He's about the most professional musician I know. He
is an outstanding accompanist. I'm always delighted when I attend a recital and find that he is accompanying a singer. So it's a real collaboration.
It is. Oh, absolutely. And I think, there's nothing any less spectacular about playing an accompaniment than there is a concerto. In many ways, it's harder because you're in the supporting role, and yet your contribution really isn't one little bit less,
I'd like to turn now to another aspect of your program on Monday night. You began with 4 Italian songs, and then you went into 4 of Mahler's Wayfarer songs. You sang these exquisitely, with great delicacy, softly, tenderly. I've never heard them sung this way. It was really, really beautiful. And when we talked in May, you mentioned that you were not entirely comfortable with the German language. You're not as familiar with it as you are with the French. But it seemed to come across very, very well, and certainly you sang it with great sensitivity. Well, tell us how you feel about these songs.
I actually feel differently about them now, which is so much fun to come back to a piece. I've done them a lot. I am totally comfortable with the Wayfarer songs because I've done them for 20 years, and I've done them as a kid, and now as not a kid. And when I first did them, Mahler, when you first hear anything of Mahler, you kind of tears your heart out, and your first inclination is to weep, literally. And then I used to think these songs, which for anyone who doesn't know them, are really a man's journey through a disappointed love. In the end, the very last thing of the songs is that everything really is good, alles gut. Alice, and that's what I believe. And at the time I thought, really he's driven to madness. He's lost his mind. He cannot bear the pain. And now I think it's not. It's more of an adult acceptance. And that obviously coincides a little bit with just being older. Mm-hmm. That, things happen in lives, and they're not deserved or undeserved. They just happen, like this rain here in California.
Yes.
I thought this was the sunshine state. And it's all fine. It's all part of a process. And so I feel that it's much more of a positive statement, really, the whole thing. It's just a journey. It's going through something. So I feel a little bit less emotional, but more accepting. So I feel that's what's fun about doing a cycle. And the fact that Mahler wrote them for the orchestra and for the piano, so they're a little bit different for the piano.
I was going to ask you about that. Some singers say that they don't like doing recitals because the voice is so exposed. Well, when you did those songs in the piano accompaniment, which doesn't have the sustaining power that the orchestra does, the voice is completely exposed, and we get a chance to really hear you almost singing solo in many passages, and it was very wonderful.
You know, it is. I mean, they are. I feel no less affectionate about these wonderful Mahler songs, and there is something magical that in many of his songs he did write his own poetry, so they have an added significance, and I think that's what is the most meaningful. And I feel that his thoughts are so tangible and really so current. They're really they're not quite rap songs, but they're very real, and they're you can see the exact emotional progression and digression within the songs, and I find that fascinating and very honest. I think they're very honest cycle of songs.
Well, they are very beautiful, and you certainly sing them exquisitely. You've also done some other German lieder. You have recorded Brahms and Schumann duets with Judith Blake, and in fact, we're going to play an excerpt from In fact, I think we have 2 Schumann duets, Terry.
Yes, we're going to hear the Botschaft from Opus 74 and Das Glück from Opus 79. And it's Frederica von Stade along with Judith Blagan, accompanied by Charles Wadsworth. We've just heard 2 duets by Schumann, the voice of Frederica von Stade, our guest here in the studio this morning, along with Judith Blagan, soprano, accompanied by Charles Wadsworth. This is the CBS recording, A Portrait of Frederica von Stade.
Flicka, going on with German lieder, you certainly are picking songs that you like and that suit your voice. And I'm wondering, have you contemplated singing Schubert and Strauss? I would think a number of their songs would lie beautifully for the lyricism of your voice.
I have sung a lot of Schubert songs, and I love Schubert and Schumann. My greatest clue, really, to singing Schubert and Schumann has been living in Austria, the times I have lived there in the summers at Salzburg or at the Vienna Staatsoper, because so much of Schubert and Schumann are about nature. And you become intensely aware of nature when you're in Austria, especially around Salzburg. I rented a house once. It was a little bit in the mountains, and I used to take my kids out for these wonderful walks in the hills, because it'd be a little bit of wooded area and then a great expanse of field. And once we heard this rushing sound, and I thought, there's not a highway up here. There can't be a highway up here. We're up in the mountains here. It's, Sound of Music land. And it was a little brook that was running, and you get the whole impact of Bächlein, that it sounded like Niagara Falls because of the thin air and the stillness and the slight bit of wind, and very much of the climate really affects how you feel, the pressure, the weather pressure. And so in a way, it was the biggest clue I had to what a lot of those songs are about. They're very affected by fog and by night and by day and wind and sun, and that's been one of the fun parts of learning some Schubert. And then just this year I've learned some Strauss for a concert actually I'm going to do here in San Francisco with the symphony.
Oh, wonderful.
And the only Strauss I knew was Rosenkavalier and the Komponist in Ariadne, and these beautiful Drei Liebeslieder that actually Schwarzkopf found, just 3 adorable little songs, and that's all I knew of Strauss. And recently I studied, when I did a Carnegie Hall recital, I put on 5 or 6 Strauss songs, and it's a very different way of singing, and very about family and motherhood. Those are the ones that sort of appealed to me, and so it's a discovery,
We heard you last night in a solo recital, and we've also heard you at the San Francisco Opera in opera. Which do you prefer, or how do you prepare differently for a solo concert as opposed to a role in an opera?
They're so different. The preparation time, we have, weeks of rehearsal. So there's this great camaraderie that usually develops when you're preparing an opera, especially the operas I do, which are all, Mozart or Rossini and big casts and not so much tension as there might be in a Verdi opera. And so I love them. I just love them. Personally, because of my loving to be home, they are more taxing because unless they're in my backyard, which I've been lucky enough to have recently because of my collaboration at the San Francisco Opera, I don't love it as much because I don't like being away. And so that's why I've taken a great preference to going out and doing a 10-day tour, doing recitals, and not knowing I'm not going to be away for 6 weeks. But they're very different. And a concert is, you have to be more focused in some regards because you're switching languages and you're switching intensity and you're telling stories with very little help. You've just got your face and you've just got your words and you have the piano, but we have so much to help us in opera. And I love jumping around. I mean, I love acting and I love getting dressed up. And so it's hard to say what the preference is. It's good to do opera, too. It's a little bit like, play ball. You got to get in there and you're in the world of opera and it's different. You're kind of, it is, the 49ers.
But of course, in recital, you have more control. You can really do what you want and do it the way you want it. You don't have the conductor or a director, you might say, imposing an interpretation on you. Do you find this more satisfying then?
No. I have had very rare occasions where I've resented the judgment of a conductor. I've worked with, the greatest conductors. I've been lucky enough with Jimmy Levine, with Claudio Abbado, with Schulte and Karajan. I'd be a darn fool to resent anything they had to say to me. And I've had very few that I haven't appreciated or enjoyed in other reasons. Some of my favorites in the world was Nicky Rossino and some of the wonderful Italian conductors who are just born with bel canto singing. Some of the producers, some of the directors, I've had some real Lulus, but they've been very interesting. They make you kind of defend the music even more strongly. Like I have got to fight harder because the scene isn't helping me. And I haven't had any real horror stories. So I like this support. I think one learns an enormous amount from a conductor. And I don't feel any resentment from what I'm fully convinced they know a heck of a lot more than me.
I want to talk a little bit about some of your moods in your recital. I would assume that you are picking songs not only that you like and that suit your voice, but also that express aspects of your personality. For example, in Monday night's recital, your songs range from the very sweet and tender, sometimes the sad, bittersweet, almost at times elegiac in the case of the Mahler. And then at the end of the first half, you gave us Schoenberg's very funny cabaret songs and sort of prepared us for the second half of the program, where in more ways than one you let your hair down. In the first half of the program you came out wearing a gorgeous full white gown and your hair was pulled back. In the second half you came down, your hair had been let down to the shoulders and you were wearing a slim black gown. And you really began to, almost at times, ham it up. You became more animated, more vivacious, and funnier. And you gave us songs like some of the American songs that were very funny, and a couple of your encores also were very funny. So, in other words, were we seeing two sides of the real Flicka here?
Well, someone asked me what I was wearing at Carnegie, and I said, well, this is what I've decided. The first half I'm going to be Tinkerbell, and the second half I'm going to be Morticia.
Well, no,
so this is Tinkerbell and Morticia. And you see, when you get to be a senior member of the kind of singing community. You know, why not? It becomes less and less important to make a complete fool of yourself. And I find that I enjoy it more and more.
Oh, it was wonderful.
And so I feel that, to a certain extent, I did feel an obligation to entertain a little bit. I knew that an enormous part of the public in that night were people that had never been to a recital in their life.
That was apparent.
Well, that was apparent to us.
I think they were, you know, somewhat appalled that they, we're going to sit and listen to some opera singer for 2 hours? Oh, my gosh. So I felt maybe a little bit of an obligation to be a little bit more entertaining. And I love those Schoenberg songs.
Oh, they're delightful.
My daughter Jenny is so funny. I forced her to come to a recital I was doing in Cornell when I sang them. And I also sang a lot of songs that is meant to be a man singing, which has been, you know, a little bit my life in the opera world. He said, but Mom, why are you singing songs that a boy's meant to sing? You know, that just strikes her as so funny, but and people see Schoenberg on the concert and think, oh my gosh, we'll never understand these, and they're going to be, and they're some of the best words. Some of the lyrics for them are just sensational. So.
Well, he spent many years copying out that kind of music for a living.
Yeah.
So he knew it intimately.
Yes, and there are plays on words, and I just adore those songs. One of Marty and I are trying to put together a cabaret project using these marvelous William Bolcom songs and Poulenc. We know 50 Poulenc songs.
I think the funniest ones of those was the last one, the aria from the Mirror of Arcady, where you were going boom, 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 flick.
Yes.
Could you give us a little demonstration of that booming right now for our listeners?
Boom, 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 boom. We see, don't expect opera singers to boom, 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 boom. I mean, it's a heartbeat. I mean, Marty and I have interpreted that exceedingly broadly.
As should be done.
It was really great fun, and I loved your final encore where you came across as a tipsy chanteuse.
That's a terrific opera, La Péricole of Offenbach, and I first did that. I was one of the cousins at the Met. They did this divine production with Cyril Richard, 185 years ago. It's a divine, all that Offenbach is. I think San Francisco would love it.
Flicka, in a moment, we'd like to turn back to your opera career, but first we'd like to play a song that you sing periodically. It's called Jenny Rebecca. It's by Carol Hall, and we have a recording by the Utah Symphony. I understand that your first daughter is named Jenny Rebecca, so this would make this a particular favorite of yours.
Absolutely. It's a song written for Barbra Streisand at one point, but she's always been too busy, so I've got to wait till she has a little time.
You've just heard Jenny Rebecca, sung by Frederica von Stade from this new recording with the Mormon Tabernacle Choir and the Utah Symphony, conducted by Joseph Silverstein. This is Terry Hawkins, along with Marilyn Hagberg. You're listening to the Evening Concert on KPFA. This is KPFA and KPFB in Berkeley, KFCF in Fresno. We're going to turn now to some of your opera recordings, and in particular, we'd like to play a selection from Massenet's Werther, which I know is a favorite of yours. We're going to hear in a moment the letter scene. Would you like to explain a little bit about what's happening at that point in the opera?
Werther, the best way to understand it is in the context of high soap opera, to a certain extent. It is a marvelous piece, and it concerns a not mad, but rather intense poet named Werther, who falls in love with a young girl named Charlotte, who, in order to please her mother, has married someone she doesn't love. And of course, Charlotte and Werther fall madly in love. But she sends him away, but keeps receiving these incredible letters saying, I'm coming back at Christmas. And so this is a scene in which she is reading his letters. And he's saying, if I can't come back and if I can't see you, he's what is he going to do? He's going to kill himself. And of course he does come back and does kill himself, and that's how the opera ends. But it's an interesting scene because she's just reading all the different types of letters that he's written her, and she's hysterical. She doesn't know what to do. She's a devout, rather simple girl who's taken over a great responsibility in raising her brothers and sisters because her mother's dead, and is astonished by the whole situation and somewhat apprehensive. So.
Here now is the letter scene from Werther by Massenet, sung by Frederica von Stade. You've just heard the letter aria from Werther by Massenet, sung by our guest, Frederica von Stade.
That's very beautiful music, Flicka. And I think Charlotte is a very interesting character, very developing. I think she's more three-dimensional, certainly, than some of the other Massenet characters.
Yes, and very warmer, really, according to Massenet, than in the Goethe. Lotte was much more of a cold, sort of cerebral girl than Charlotte. She's just caught in an incredible, and her life because of this is ruined because she's in love with him. Her life is over in that, as lives were in those days. She's quite a girl, and it is the most sublime music.
Beautiful music.
And I've been able to do it with some of the greatest tenors, Alfredo Kraus, and intensely difficult tenor music, and beautiful.
You've
So I
sung
love
it also with Jose Carreras.
Yes, and Jose, who I adore. And I get to play a girl. What can I tell you?
I know, it's a
Love
break.
it.
It's a break from your trouser rolls,
I get
which are
dresses and wigs. And
That's true, because you are noted for a number of trouser roles. Hansel, Cherubino in Mozart's Marriage of Figaro, Octavian, whom you'll be singing here this summer with the San Francisco Opera. Another aria that we want to play that we both love is from Rossini's Otello. You've done a lot of Rossini, and in our last program we did play the Rossini arias from The Barber of Seville and from La Cenerentola, the Cinderella. This is the Otello, different from the Verdi Otello. Could you talk about that a little bit?
very different. I mean, it's Rossini. It's night and day. But the story is terribly different in many ways. That I'm not sure why it isn't often staged, and I've never done it staged. I've done a full recording. I think the reason is that you really only see Desdemona and Otello after they're mad at each other. You don't see their... they talk about their passion and they talk about it, but you don't actually see it. There's not one aria where they are in love or that you understand their passion. But this aria it's unusual because it can come right out of the opera too. And one of the most beautiful parts of it is this incredible solo in the harp. And I remember when we recorded, there was this Welsh girl who played it, and just with all the naturalness and natural musicality, and the whole orchestra just stood up and applauded. It was so beautiful. And it's this the Salce. I mean, it's the little story of sadness with this ominousness and the prayer at the end. And it has a wonderful simplicity. I've really just loved doing it over the years.
Let's listen now to Desdemona's aria from Otello, sung by Frederica von Stade. You've been listening to Desdemona's aria from Otello by Rossini, performed by our guest this evening, Frederica von Stade.
Flicka, a thought that's come to my mind a number of times is about roles that you perhaps haven't sung very often. Your voice is really ideal for the classical opera, for French opera, also for Rossini, and of course you're a great Strauss singer. And I think we'll hear that this summer when you sing Octavian. A friend of mine, Terry also knows her, who is a mezzo-soprano here in the Bay Area, asked me an interesting question recently. She's a fan of yours. She was wondering if you had ever thought of singing Dalila in Saint-Saëns' Samson and Dalila. this is a role that's usually sung by heavier voices, and yet she felt, and I think I tend to agree, that it would be wonderful sung by a lyrical mezzo like you. Have you ever given that any thought?
I haven't. I've always had in the back of my mind that it was for a much bigger voice, a much rounder kind of TT voice, Tatiana Troyanos, Jackie voice. I'm very respectful of the lyricism of my voice. I just can't push it. It just doesn't work. And the first thing that I look at in many things is the orchestration. And I think the Saint-Saëns orchestration is not only large, but it's very thick. I have to be very careful of Octavian and of Werther. I have to have conductors who really know what they're getting.
That's right, because the orchestration is very dense
very
in both
dense,
of those.
Very dense. And so you really have to have someone who is enormously sympathetic. You can't compete, when the orchestra isn't held down to some extent. So it isn't something I've thought of, but it would interesting idea. I've been asked to do Carmen, but I mean it's just not for me.
Yeah, I think that would be there again. That takes a much heavier, more dramatic voice. I think it's wise that you do protect the voice.
Yeah, it's just it's not to the manner born.
But you have done quite a bit of the Baroque also, and of course we heard earlier the Gluck Orfeo, which is beautiful. And you have performed and recorded the Monteverdi, the Il Ritorno di Lucien Patria, which you sang here, in fact, 2 years ago. Have you ever done Romeo, the Bellini Romeo?
No, I just with Seiji Azawa, Kathy Battle and I did excerpts from Capuletti. And we had a ball doing it. I just loved it. I had always thought that was a little bit dramatic. It's very difficult role, the Romeo in that. But I just loved it. I do absolutely treasure Bellini. I think the great master of song, everything about bel canto can be understood in one Bellini aria or song. And so this little bit that we did a long love duet, and I guess it's in the second act. And I love doing it. And Seiji was terrific. So I'd love to try that on, fit that on. I'd love to do Adalgisa again. In a few years.
You tried that very early in your career, didn't you? And it came out somewhat less than successfully, I understand.
Well, I did it with a soprano who had just a Wagnerian voice, and that was a total mismatch. And I was way too young to do it. But I did love it. I just love those tunes. And I think it's always been in the tradition of a much bigger voice. But there is something that I don't think should be a bigger voice, because Adalgisa is meant to be the younger sort of paramour, and that the youthfulness would come across, not I think it should be two sopranos almost.
Before we leave the Baroque, you and the classical, you're going to be essaying a complete Handel opera this summer at Santa Fe, Xerxes. You mentioned it back in May that you wanted to do more Handel, and that it was very good for the voice, that it helps keep it flexible.
Yes, and I've never done it before, and so I'm looking forward to it a lot.
I'd like to turn back to another of your favorite composers, Mozart. You, of course, are noted for your Cherubino, a role which you told us last time you've now relinquished. But you have done other Mozart roles, notably Sesto in La Clemenza di Tito, and we'll be singing that next season at the San Francisco Opera, so I'm certainly looking forward to that. You also have sung Zerlina in Don Giovanni, which is a delightful role for mezzo, and we're going to play an excerpt from that. Have you performed that a great deal? I know you haven't performed Zerlina as much as you have Cherubino or Sesto.
No, I did it a lot at the Met for a number of years, like 10 years, and then I just haven't done it so much, but I love Zerlina. And I think I did it Santa Fe as well.
It's another great dress part for
yes,
us.
Yes, yeah.
We've just heard two arias from Mozart. First from Don Giovanni, we heard Vedrai Carino, and from La Clemenza di Tito, we heard Parto Parto, both sung by our guest this evening, Frederica von Stade. We've been listening to Frederica von Stade in the aria Must the Winter Come So Soon from the opera Vanessa by the American composer Samuel Barber. One thing I'd like to ask you about your voice. When I first heard the first recording of yours that I heard, anyway, with a Columbia recording that you made with some leader and many different composers, I thought, what a wonderful, sweet voice this is. I enjoyed it tremendously. More recently, I seem to have heard, well, the sweetness certainly remains. I have heard an intensity in your voice that I would hear before on certain notes, but now I seem to hear it almost all the time, and it's really a thrilling effect. Does that make sense to you, or am I completely out to lunch? How do you yourself think your voice has changed?
I do think voices change just in that they, age, period. And I think they darken a little bit. Mine has not darkened the way it could have, or the way some voices. Mine has, in the category of like Teresa and Berganza, it started out being a lyric voice. In the middle, it was a lyric voice, and at the end, it'll be a lyric voice. But within that, I have. It changes somewhat. I think it is in nature a bit darker, and I feel more dramatic. I feel more dramatic because of hundreds of things. Experience in the business, the repertoire that I'm doing, what's happened to me in my life. Certainly, having children and going through the ecstasy, really, of being crazy about your children and worrying about them. You change, and I think it's reflected in my voice. I think it's just there, and I've actually, it's a nice thought to think about. I haven't thought about it, so I'm talking off the top of my head. But I think it has changed. I think it's appropriate for me to give up some of the roles I have been doing. I think they're just some wonderful newcomers who should be doing them, and it's appropriate. It's time. And I like that. I don't regret it one little bit. I feel that to ask any more of some roles, it would be just greed. And I look forward to the other ones. I mean, I really am looking forward to Dangerous Liaison, playing a real mean, Erica on One Life to Live. Can't wait. I look forward to that, and I don't mind showing that either. I don't mind. I feel much more willing and able to show more of what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling about life and people, and basically I love life and love people. But it's okay to show extreme points of view in the process, and I like that. I think that's what I'm meant to do now. I think that's what artists, singers, performers at my stage of a career are supposed to do. I feel like I've done what I've done. Like I am, in the most modest sense of the word, a master. I know what I'm doing. Mastery does have nothing to do with perfection. I have to make that extremely clear. The voice, and especially my voice, is an exceedingly imperfect instrument. But I know what I need to do, and I know how to do it, and I don't think I'd ever be a singing teacher, but I'd love to share what I know with younger singers. I couldn't teach singing. It's too great a responsibility, but I could share what I know in the processes, and that, sort of like support for young singers. You're fine. Don't worry. Keep going. Go for it. This is fine. Believe. The voice is such a fragile instrument, and it takes so much, really, to put it out there that you need kind of every support system you can.
Well, you've certainly cared for your voice well. You're going into your third decade now as an opera singer, as a recitalist, and the voice is still ravishingly lyrical and really beautiful. And I think we'll be looking forward to what you have coming up. The La Clemenza di Tito in the fall, the De Rosenkavalier at San Francisco in the summer, and for those of us that can make it to Santa Fe, your Handel. And Terry, back to you.
Well, I'd just like to say thank you very much for coming down here this morning, especially after the recital that you sang last night. It's always a pleasure to have you on the program. Open invitation. Please come back
Terry.
anytime whatsoever.
Thank you very much.
Flicka, thanks again. It's been a great...
And what